the reason that they are boycotting Barclays, and this is all coming from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. Today is one of their national days of action where they're calling on people at branches across the country to boycott Barclays. They say it's because the bank, from their own research, has £1 billion, they say, in shares and provides £3 billion in loans and underwriting to 9 companies, they say, whose weapons components and military technology, they say, are being used by Israel on their attacks in Gaza. So that's why they want people to boycott Barclays, with the idea being that therefore if people boycott Barclays and they take their business elsewhere, they won't be able to afford to loan those companies any money, of course. But what we've seen from the likes of Rishi Sunak, of course, on the steps of Downing Street, is that he is saying that there are forces here at home trying to tear us apart and wanting the police to properly police these kind of protests when we see things which are alarming and intimidatory, rather than just maybe mind the protesters. Certainly there was some involvement from the West Midlands Police here in Wolverhampton today when there was a passerby who was obviously growing in frustration at the repeated Palestinian protests in the likes of cities like this in Wolverhampton. He tried to confront the protesters 3 times, going up to them, shouting in their faces. There was a bit of back and forth, but the West Midlands Police did get involved and pull those 2 people apart and then sent him on his way. And finally, after the 3rd attempt, he did leave once and for all. So there was some confrontation, but certainly the police more keen and eager to get involved. But possibly that could just be just because of where we are today. It's not so much it wasn't so much greater size in numbers particularly. It was small numbers, so that's probably why the police were able to get involved more freely. When we have that first, again, since that point of Rishi Sunak's speeches on the steps of Downing Street on the 9th of March, that big, more national protest for Palestine, that's when we'll really see whether the words of the Prime Minister have been taken in by the likes of the Metropolitan Police down in London, and and we'll see then how these protests are policed in the coming weeks.
Did you sense, though, that the police appear to have more confidence in their behaviour? Because a lot of the time when I've watched the police, they've looked somewhat timid when it comes to sort of speaking and approaching protesters.
And now, thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters are marching across the country once again today, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. They've been going on for over 4 months across the country in cities like London, Manchester and Edinburgh. But the protests aren't just happening in the street now. Pro-Palestinian protesters are also occupying branches of Barclays Bank, calling for a boycott of the bank over links to Israel arms manufacturers. Joining me now is our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who is loitering somewhere near a Barclays Bank, I believe. Yes, there you are, Jack, outside of Barclays Bank. Jack, what's going on? How many protesters are there and what are they up to?
Well, we're probably looking at less than 100 protesters here, particularly here in Wolverhampton, but this is all action organised by the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign all across the country today at multiple branches of Barclays Bank, from Wales to the southeast to where we are here in the West Midlands. There are protesters on this day of action calling for people to try and boycott this bank. It's a little bit of a change in tactic as well from the campaign, who's saying that they feel like boycotts are working more maybe than other methods, but they're saying, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, that they're from their own research. They say that Barclays Bank holds over £1 billion in shares and provides £3 billion in loans and underwriting to 9 companies, they say, whose weapons components and military technology are being used by Israel on its attacks, of course, against the likes of Hamas and those people within Gaza. So that's why they're here outside the likes of Barclays here in the West Midlands and also across the country as well. The protests here particularly today, they've had some music, not in terms of the chanting that we've seen at other protests. So with the music playing in the background that you might be able to hear behind me, with their flags demanding a ceasefire now, and they've been waving flags as cars have gone by, trying to encourage people to beat their horns in support. But of course, with these protests, there does also come some opposition from some people that have been walking by these protesters, feeling angry at of course, their cause, trying to put their side across. There has been one member of the public that was spoken to by West Midlands police here. There have been a few police in attendance, but of course this all goes, doesn't it, back to what Rishi Sunak was saying on the streets of Downing Street last night about wanting him wanting the police to police protests rather than just stand by. So the police have got involved when they've needed to here particularly, but just in the case of this protest specifically, there hasn't been any necessarily kind of important steps or action that they've had to take against any of them. Just a few talking to a few members of the public who very quickly were starting to kind of rise tensions. But that's very much how these things do overspill in the first place. Of course, around the country there might well be more tensioned protests, particularly as well in Birmingham, as we saw a few weeks ago. Then we are people actually occupying the bank inside. These protesters haven't actually gone inside the bank today, simply standing outside it. That will be very much the case across the country, unless, of course, some protesters decide to take it into their hands, particularly. But responding to what Rishi Sunak was saying on the streets of Downing Street yesterday about feeling like that there is some intimidation going on around the country, that the actual leader of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, Ben Jamal, he said on Twitter that Rishi Sunak, if he wants to deal with extremists, should start to look at the politicians, political commentators, he says, and religious leaders who are supporting what they are saying is a genocide in Palestine. And he says that he should look in the mirror around his cabinet table and kick out the likes of Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick and Michael Gove first.
Jack, just very briefly, we're running out of time. When you say the police got involved, was that with the protesters or with a member of the public walking past who was angry at the protest?
That was just a member of the public who was angry at the protesters. Right. He was shouting quite a lot, obviously supporting Israel over the likes of Palestine, and obviously not feeling like these protests should still be going on. So wasn't no formal arrests made, just simply a talking to from the police officer to calm down.
OK, brilliant. That's Jack Carson there in Westminster reporter in Wolverhampton, I think he said, wasn't he? Outside of Barclays Bank, where there are protests going on, as you saw there. Interesting, though, the police taking more action straight away after Rishi Sunak's statement yesterday.
It's certainly, well, when they kind of got knack of this starting to, I wouldn't say kick off, because there was no kind of physical involvement between the two parties, but when the shouting got a little bit louder and a little bit louder, the police were straight over just to kind of come and try and pull these two people apart and just try and move this member of the public that was obviously not happy with these protests today, move them on. Certainly this morning when we were here observing the protests at the start, there was quite a few members of the police before they realised that there wasn't really going to be too much of a crowd, and obviously they diverted resources. So certainly the police presence has been greater here today than maybe it has been previously. And yes, certainly I'd say, Nana, that my observation is that they were certainly quicker to get involved and not just stand around maybe watching, as some criticism has been of them before.
Listen, Jack, thank you very much. That's Jack Carson. He's our West Midlands reporter. He's there in Wolverhampton. Well, joining me now from Israel to discuss the conflict, there is Mustafa Uri Geller. Uri, thank you so much for joining me again. It's always a pleasure to see you. I wanted to ask you straight away, were Rishi Sunak's words welcome words from where you are in Israel?
Nana, please, allow me to divert your attention to something totally different. Look, okay. Nana, we usually talk about what's going on in Israel. But today, I want to ask, what's going on in Britain? What is happening to your country? So last week, jihadists hijacked Big Ben. Then your MPs say they're getting death threats. And now some Hamas fanboy called George Galloway has been elected. What is happening to British democracy? Nana, listen, will you allow me to deliver a personal message for George Galloway on your program? Please allow me. So listen, hey, George. Now, I know you don't like Israelis and you boycott them as a matter of principle. Yes, you refuse to even meet them. You refuse to meet Israelis. But wait a minute, George. But look at this. Look at this, George. Remember, George, how you came running up to me. Yes, you came to me because I was famous. Suddenly, you didn't really care so much. You put your arm around me, look, and you knew I was Israeli, and you knew that I had served in the IDF. George Galloway hugged an Israeli. What a hypocrite!
Well, listen,
George,
Uri.
Wait, let me finish.
All right, you finish, George, and then I'll speak for George.
Yeah, George, listen, you are a walking pantomime.
Anyway, sorry, go on, Uri.
About Israel. Look, seriously, here in Israel, we got some terrible news last night. As you know, Hamas has been holding dozens of Israeli hostages for 148 days. Well, now it says that 7 more have been killed. This is unbearable for Israel. We have got to get the remaining hostages out. And lastly, I'll say this. Hostage release talks are going nowhere because Hamas is making impossible demands. Do not forget that Hamas has caused this war. Israel wants to end the war, end the Palestinian suffering, and bring our hostages back.
UK immigration news. In response to escalating protests, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak issued a stark warning to police leaders regarding the perceived erosion of democratic principles in favor of mob rule. The protests, which have surged in intensity and scale, reflect widespread discontent among the populace. Sunak's concerns center around the potential for these demonstrations to devolve into chaotic scenes that undermine established democratic processes. The Prime Minister's message underscores a broader societal unease with the efficacy of governance and the rule of law. He stressed the critical role of law enforcement in maintaining order and upholding democratic norms amidst mounting social unrest. Sunak's admonition reflects a governmental stance aimed at quelling unrest while preserving the integrity of democratic institutions. The protests have been characterized by a diverse array of grievances, ranging from economic disparities to civil liberties issues. This multifaceted discontent has contributed to an environment where public dissent often manifests in confrontational and sometimes disorderly conduct. Sunak's warning to police chiefs signals a concerted effort to mitigate the potential for further unrest to spiral into lawlessness. The Prime Minister's stance has ignited debate over the appropriate balance between safeguarding public order and respecting the right to protest. Critics argue that such warnings may stifle legitimate expressions of dissent, while supporters maintain that maintaining law and order is essential for functioning democracy. In conclusion, Sunak's cautionary message reflects the complexities of governing in an era of heightened social tensions and rapid information dissemination. As protests continue to evolve, the government faces the ongoing challenge of fostering dialogue while preventing the escalation of unrest into unchecked chaos. Balancing these imperatives will likely shape the trajectory of public discourse and governance in the coming months.